And good afternoon. You're listening to Ken Hudnall. This is the Ken Hudnall Show. Coming to you from our studios right here in exciting El Paso, Texas. Gateway to the Old West and the most haunted city in the country. Well, today's October 24th, 297th day of the year. Just 68 days remain to the year's over with, and we get to start a new one. Holidays and observances. National Food Day. Now, eating well doesn't have to be boring or restrictive, and your body with nutrient-dense foods be energized and nourished. Global Champagne Day, World Kangaroo Day, National Kangaroo Awareness Day, National Bologna Day, World Tripe Day, Wear It Pink Day, Take Back Your Time Day, National Senior UTI Awareness Day, World Polio Day, My Best Winter Skin Day, World Development Information Day, United Nations Day, National Chemistry Week, ACE Week, Baku Jazz Festival. For those that are really into jazz, this is held in Azerbaijan. Attracts jazz enthusiasts from around the world. Free Speech Week, YWCA Week Without Violence, Global Media and Information Literacy Week, Artes Mundi, National Parenting Week, National Health Education Week, National Retirement Security Week, Phuket Vegetarian Festival, Truffle Days in Croatia, Oktoberfest in Blumenau. Well, famous people were on this date. I don't have any on my list for today. Isn't that fascinating? All right, let's see what stories we got in the news. There's always something going on. Well, Senate Democrats just killed another attempt to open the government back up. This time, essential workers are left unpaid after the Senate Democrats kill another bill. The shutdown is going on now for 23 days. And they blocked a Republican-led attempt to provide essential government workers with paychecks. Called the bill overly selective and incomplete. That bill was proposed by Senator Ron Johnson, Republican of Wisconsin, and Todd Young, Republican of Indiana. Failed in a 54-45 vote. Takes 60 votes to advance the bill over the threat of a filibuster. Only 3 Democrats, John Fetterman of Pennsylvania, Raphael Warnock, and John Ossoff of Georgia, voted with the Republicans. This Schumer shutdown is steamrolling ahead. Well, former NBA stars were part of a rigged poker game that cost victims over $7 million, according to the DOJ. Chauncey Billups and Damon Jones were allegedly used to coerce victims in illegal poker games. They were both former NBA players. Billups is currently the Portland Trailblazers head coach, and Damon Jones was arrested and charged with conspiracy to commit both wire fraud and money laundering after participating in rigged poker games. They were allegedly dubbed as face cards, which the indictment says were members of the cheating teams, and they got a portion of the criminal proceeds in exchange for their participation in the scheme. The scheme resulted in victims losing at least $7.15 million. Dates back to April 2019. Well, White House has trolled the Democrats over the ballroom meltdown. Oh, they're just having a cow about the ballroom that's being built, which is not being done with government funds, by the way. And now adds cocaine and Clinton Obama scandals to the timeline. White House website as of Thursday includes a major events timeline of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue stretching back to 1791. When plans for the iconic building were first mapped out. Timeline includes a series of benchmarks such as addition of the North Portico, 1829 to 1830. Addition of the Oval Office in 1909 under the Taft administration, and total reconstruction of the White House interior under the Truman administration. They also mentioned Hillary's attempt to run off with several $1 million of government furniture. Well, Russia violates NATO airspace in Lithuania amid Putin's warning about long-range missiles. According to President Gitanas Nausėda, this is a blatant breach of international law and territorial integrity of Lithuania, and it confirms the importance of strengthening European air defense readiness. Lithuanian Ministry of Defense said Russian military aircraft briefly entered Lithuanian airspace. The forces acted quickly with NATO jets on patrol. 2 Russian airplanes, an Su-30 and an Il-78, a refueling aircraft, in Lithuanian airspace for about 18 seconds. Well, 8 Americans got arrested in the Bahamas. The authorities discovered high-powered weapons and ammunition hidden on their boat. The Royal Bahamas Police Force said in a news release officers from the Allenstown Police Station worked with the Bahamas Customs Department to search a vessel docked at a port in Bimini, a chain of western islands about 50 miles east of Miami, Florida. The officers were acting on intelligence. They didn't specify what intelligence they had. The 10 occupants on the boat, including 8 Americans, 1 South African, and another one from Guyana, were taken into custody. Those who were arrested ranged in age from 21 to 62. They were not identified. Well, Jelly Roll admits to cheating on wife, Bunny Coe, in a rare public confession. He admitted one of the worst moments of his life was when he was cheating on his wife. He said, I don't talk about this publicly at all, but one of the worst moments of my adulthood was when I had an affair on my wife. Well, President Trump has postponed a federal troop deployment to San Francisco. He's called off a surge of federal agents and troops in San Francisco planned for this weekend. After speaking to local officials, federal government was preparing to surge San Francisco on Saturday, but friends of his who work in the area called last night and asked him not to go forward with that surge. They said the mayor, Daniel Lurie, was making substantial progress. So he's been given a chance to straighten things out, and if he can't, Homeland Security said they're ready to go. Well, cancer survivors appear to have double the chance of surviving with a common vaccine, according to researchers. For cancer patients undergoing immunotherapy, researchers found getting a mRNA COVID-19 vaccination within about 100 days of starting immune checkpoint therapy was associated with substantially better survival. At least it's good for something. Well, new billboards are going up, slamming New York and New Jersey over the massive resident flight to the red states. Billboards say going to Florida and Texas. The Unleashed Property told Fox News it plans to leave its warning sign in place till November 19th. They said, we're running this billboard campaign to alert people, the citizens of these states, that you're losing your most precious resource in New Jersey and New York. You know what that precious resource is? Your people, your citizens, your business, and the money that they spend. Well, I will say cost of living is a whole lot cheaper in Texas than it ever was in New York. We lived in New York City for 3 years. Well, Winsome Earl Sears mocks MSNBC panel for suggesting voting against her opponent is sexist. She is the Virginia Republican gubernatorial candidate. And on Morning Joe, the panelists suggested that voting against her Democratic opponent, Abigail Spanberger, was sexist, which of course will send people running for the closet. Co-host Mika Brzezinski and Jonathan Lemire, along with liberal commentator Molly Jong-Fast, complained that Spanberger and the New Jersey Democratic gubernatorial candidate Representative Mickey Sherrill were not running away with their races and blamed sexism in America. Yes, the Democrats' attitude when they lose is not that they didn't run a good campaign. It's either racism or sexism or something like that. Well, a manhunt's underway after a college student was attacked on campus after a reported road rage incident. This was at Maryland University. They've launched a manhunt after a student was attacked on campus following a reported road rage incident during the early morning rush hour. Well, let's try it again. The incident occurred at 8:55 in the morning when a Towson University student notified police had been assaulted in parking lot 11 on campus. Victims said they had been involved in an off-campus road rage incident in which the alleged suspect followed them to a campus parking lot and then attacked them. The suspect, described as a male driving a dark-colored sedan, alleged that his vehicle physically assaulted the student, slashed the car's tires, and then fled the scene in his own vehicle. The victim was injured, but declined medical treatment. Well, Youngkin has declared a state of emergency over Democratic shutdown, depleting SNAP benefits for 850,000 Virginians. That was Virginia Governor Glenn Youngkin. Declared this state of emergency Thursday from Richmond, blaming congressional Democrats for dragging out the federal government shutdown, rejecting the Supplemental Nutritional Assistance Program, or SNAP. It's going to run out in just over a week. The Democratic shutdown is going to cause SNAP benefits to run out for over 850,000 Virginians in need starting November 1st, he said. He said he refused to let Virginians be used to leverage by congressional Democrats. He's declaring a state of emergency. Well, let's see what he can do with that. Well, a California police officer was struck and killed by a car while stopping to help a driver. It's the La Mesa Police Department. The individual was struck and killed by a car while stopping to help a driver. Officer Lauren Craven was killed Monday evening, according to the California City's Department. Officer Craven was returning to the city of La Mesa from San Diego Central Jail when she came upon a collision on an eastbound Interstate 8 at Fairmont Avenue. Got out of her own vehicle to assist, was struck and killed by another motorist. She was 25, according to the local Fox 5. Been with the department since February 2024 and survived by her parents, her sister, and her partner. Devontae Morris, 19, was also killed as a result of the crash that killed Craven. Well, Democrats are under fire as food stamps are drying up. 42 million Americans are caught in the shutdown fight. That's how many use the Supplemental Nutritional Assistance Program, or SNAP. They're not going to get aid as of November 1st when the program's funds run dry. More than 24 states have alerted residents to possible lapses in funding. It requires about $8 billion a month to fund SNAP benefits nationwide. When there's no funding, it impacts not just the pockets of the people, but it's going to impact people all around the country. But Chuck Schumer will go to bed happy and his stomach full. Well, Curtis Sliwa vows to be Zoran Mondami's worst nightmare if the Democratic Socialist wins the New York City mayoral race. When the New York City Democratic mayoral nominee Zoran Mondami admitted he would rank his Republican opponent Curtis Sliwa second in the general election, used ranked choice voting, Sliwa said Mondami's going to regret ever knowing the name if the socialist candidate gets elected. We'll see what comes of that. Well, President Trump freezes out Putin for lack of enough action toward peace. Future talks are uncertain at this point. He called off his meeting in Budapest, Hungary with Russian President Vladimir Putin because he didn't see enough progress toward peace. When Trump and Putin spoke over the phone October 16th, plans for the meeting were scrapped after Secretary of State Marco Rubio's call with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov on Tuesday. Well, Apple building American-made AI servers ahead of schedule in a new Houston facility. Apple Houston's manufacturing facility is operating ahead of schedule. They're now building and shipping American-made artificial intelligence servers in the U.S., a move that has the technology giant answering President Trump's call to onshore manufacturing of all types. Well, there are 4 U.S. hotspots. Just made the National Geographic's top destinations list. The scenery and sights in North Dakota, Oklahoma, Hawaii, and Pennsylvania. In North Dakota, it's the Badlands, known for its rugged landscape, sweeping hills, prairie grasses, canyons, and rock formations. In Oklahoma, we got Route 66, America's famous highway spanning the country from Chicago, Illinois to Santa Monica, California. It's going to celebrate its 100th anniversary in 2026. Maui, Hawaii. Hawaii is already America's tranquil getaway, attracting tourists with its blue waters and stunning beaches. Devastating wildfires of Maui in 2023 caused more than $5 billion in damage and claimed more than 100 lives. Specifically destroyed the historic beach town of Lahaina. And Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, a not-to-miss city for its thriving cultural scene and museum variety. Well, let's see. Robbie Starbuck sued Google. He claims it put out outrageously false information through artificial intelligence. He's a conservative activist. Spoke out about the crazy situation, prompted him to file a lawsuit against Google on Wednesday. He's seeking more than $15 million in damages, alleging the company's artificial intelligence programs defamed him by falsely portraying him as a monster to millions of users. He said the assassination of Turning Point USA founder Charlie Kirk last month made him realize some crazy person might believe this stuff. So he got him up in arms to set the record straight. Well, Kim Kardashian has been diagnosed with a brain aneurysm. Doctors attribute it to the stress after the Kanye West divorce. I would say that living with him would have been more likely to cause the aneurysm than divorcing him. But she's had an up and down life, long as I don't know anything about her. Well, Fetterman has broken with the Democrats over the shutdown. He claims he's going to put the country over the party. Bernie Sanders defends Maine Senate candidate under fire in Reddit comments. He's the independent from Vermont, and he's standing firm behind Maine Democratic candidate Graham Plattner, first-time Senate hopeful facing outrage over a Nazi-style tattoo and resurfaced Reddit post. Yes, he has a Nazi-style tattoo on his chest, but we're supposed to overlook that. Well, J.D. Vance has called Psaki's comments about his wife Usha disgraceful. He has slammed the former White House press secretary Jen Psaki's disgraceful remarks, implying the second lady, Usha Vance, is afraid of her husband. He says he's lucky to have such a wonderful life and honored to have her by his side during his trip to Israel. Well, a man's accused of killing his teacher wife after wandering shirtless and warning of too many cops nearby. He's a Texas man, arrested days after police say he killed his wife inside the couple's home last week. This was in Alvarado, Texas. Chelsea Spillers, 33, was killed inside her home October 18th in what authorities say is being investigated as an unexplained death. Detectives were responding to requests for welfare check at the high school biology teacher's home when they discovered her body. Investigators now suspect her husband, Brandon Ashley, is responsible for her death, which was caused by blunt force trauma. That's according to preliminary evidence in the coroner's report. On Monday, authorities got reports of a shirtless man trespassing at a residence in Bedias, located about 150 miles south of Alvarado. The individual later identified as Ashley, the husband, reportedly believed to be experiencing a mental health episode while walking on private property. Spotted knocking on neighbors' doors to ask for a shirt and allegedly made comments about avoiding a nearby highway because there were too many cops. Well, the California high school volleyball team with a trans athlete has found its controversial season ended with a playoff loss. It was a nationally contentious season. Came to an end Wednesday night for a high school girls volleyball team in California. Jurupa Valley High School lost their first-round state playoff game to Valencia High School in straight sets. This loss presumably marked the end of trans athlete A.B. Hernandez's high school volleyball career. The team saw 10 games forfeited off the team schedule because they had a transgender team member. And a lawsuit against the school district was filed by 2 current and 1 former teammate of Hernandez. Well, Michael J. Fox has called out the bully culture and names his biggest bully in a new interview. He's blasting the bully culture, sharing his own experience with what he calls his biggest bully, Parkinson's disease. 30th anniversary of Back to the Future, Fox and his co-stars, Christopher Lloyd and Leah Thompson, sat down from Empire to discuss the iconic sci-fi movie. Fox noted, like in the film, the bully culture remains live and well, but he's dealing with a bully he cannot defeat. Well, Tom Hanks went incognito on the New York City subway with a mask and a beanie during a recent trip. Saving Private Ryan actor wore a face mask, glasses, and a beanie while sitting quietly on the 6 train Tuesday. It wasn't clear if any of the other riders in the car recognized the 2-time Academy Award winner, but he appeared to be left alone during the ride. Earlier this month, he told Jimmy Kimmel, while the host show was in Brooklyn, how much he enjoyed taking a subway in New York City. And having taken it many times, I can tell you it definitely is an interesting ride. Well, Red State University student caught on video threatening lives of Charlie Kirk supporters, saying, "Watch your neck." The pink-haired individual, presumably a student, told a group of Turning Point USA students who'd set up a tent on the University of Arizona campus, "Hey, Nazis, can you set up somewhere where I can avoid you more easily?" "Yeah, thank you. Have a great day," one of the students responded. A lot of crazy people out there. Well, top Republican has slammed Catherine Clark for admitting suffering families are actually leverage in the shutdown battle. Top House Republicans criticizing one of the Democratic senior leaders for saying the government shutdown's effects are a leverage point to accomplish their goals on health care. See, they want to spend trillions of dollars to give health care to every undocumented immigrant in the country. But they've admitted to weaponizing hardworking Americans as leverage for political gain. And finally, father found his 13-year-old son dead after falling 200 feet from the bluff inside the popular national park site. Arkansas father made a heartbreaking discovery over the weekend and found his 13-year-old son dead after a 200-foot fall from a bluff at Buffalo National River. 13-year-old boy fell from the cliff near Brewer Bluff in the park's Middle District. Well, on that note, we're going to see what stories we have in the news. Now, that is the news. Well, I guess we're going to do we're going to talk about more unsolved mysteries. You know, there's a lot of things that absolutely baffle people. We've been talking about a good many of them. You know, in India, there is a ghost village called Hara. In the span of several hundred years, a prosperous ancient settlement in India known as Kuldhara network of surrounding villages boasted a civilization of about 1,500 people in the 13th century. But for some reason, this civilization was at a later point in its history suddenly abandoned. No war, no visible disaster. Looks like those who lived there, for some inexplicable reason, just got up and left. It's incredibly bizarre, to say the least, to have a well-established community in the ancient world suddenly abandoned and its citizens vanished from the record without any trace. There is one persistent aspect to this story, though, that folks continue to whisper about. There's a legend that those who abandoned the settlement in the early 19th century had uttered some sort of curse prior to leaving. That was done in order to ensure that no one else moved in who lived in that region. Now, this, of course, sounds absurd, but even so, the curse must have worked because nobody's taken up shop there since that place was abandoned. And it's not for lack of trying. There are countless tales of people trying to move into the area only to be beset with all manner of bad luck. Some have supposedly even died inexplicably. Whatever the case may be, the bodies were scared stiff by the ghost town and really wanted nothing at all to do with it. According to researchers, the town itself is believed to date back all the way to the year 1291. It was first settled by Paliwal Brahmins. The name Koldara itself is indicative of this, since it's the name of a certain subcaste of Paliwal Brahmins. First chief of this group of settlers is also believed to have been a Brahmin. It's said that the Paliwal Brahmins themselves are fairly affluent according to the standards of the region, and they were furthermore highly successful in growing crops such as wheat. And they did this despite the environmental hardships that were so common in the desert-like surrounding environment. Koldara was a land of plenty, a veritable oasis in the middle of a desert wasteland. It wasn't just rich in material goods, but also in spiritual practice. It said that those who lived there were hard-working, honest people and liked to help others. The actual layout of the settlement is said to have been quite carefully thought out. Wide streets that flowed in a grid-like pattern from one house to another. There's also a water tank in place for the settlement to ensure that they could still have access to water even during periods of extreme drought. Surrounding architecture is said to have been of incredible quality. Even the surrounding gates to the village were of impeccable workmanship. You first see the gates before reaching the abandoned site of Koldara itself. When you enter this ancient abandoned village, you're struck by just how well preserved a lot of the houses are. Daily life of those who live there can still be observed by the way the empty buildings and rooms interact with the environment. One evening out of the blue in the year 1825, all the residents who lived in Koldara village suddenly vanished without a trace. To this day, nobody knows where they went or even why they went. They were just gone. There are mundane explanations such as mass migration to another site, but there are multiple problems with such a prosaic explanation. For one thing, how in the world could a whole village of 1,500 people evacuate in the middle of the night without anybody in the surrounding region noticing? And even if such a thing were possible, somebody somewhere in the surrounding vicinity would have noticed this mass exodus of people. Also, the glaring problem, no other settlements any record of suddenly being beset with a population boom as these supposed Koldara refugees poured in. And although nobody knows for sure what happened, there are a lot of legends that have developed over the years to suggest that, to explain the disappearance. One suggests that a local ruler demanded a Koldara girl's hand in marriage, and this ruler wasn't well liked. In fact, he was viewed as a tyrant. The girl apparently didn't want anything to do with him, and the residents of Hudnalll didn't blame her. But if she refused, the despot would have sent an army in to destroy the village. And supposedly, according to this theory, the whole town packed up and left in the middle of the night, so she wouldn't have to marry the guy. Different variation of this narrative takes place a bit further by suggesting that the girl that the villagers sought to protect was actually killed right before the whole town fled, lest they be found on the road with her, subjected to punishment for stifling tyrannical rulers' marital ambition. This aspect of the legend gives rise to a legend of a female ghost haunts the abandoned city to this very day. And as you might imagine, this is not a happy ghost. And there are indeed some brave souls who visited the site who readily report they felt an unseen force push them, at times even punch them, as if it were trying to drive them out of the abandoned village. But the scariest stuff, though, seems to happen after the sun goes down. Story 2 German tourists who attempted to spend the night at the site just to see what might happen. But they were up to a little bit more than sightseeing. They were treasure hunters and had heard tales about gold being hidden in the village. After midnight, when they were certain they were all alone, they began to dig in key areas of the village, hoping to find this buried treasure. Suppose they did find some buried treasure of some sort, but they weren't able to carry it off. Supposing one of them cooked, they sickened and died, and the other frantic rattled tourist was arrested shortly after that. So was this part of the Hudnalll curse? Well, there are many who believe it was. Well, let's talk about a tribe I've mentioned before, the Dogon tribe. And their stories about visitors from the stars. In a remote region of West Africa, an obscure tribe known as the Dogon exists. This tribe today is estimated at some 400,000 people. It's not too different from their contemporaries. They live in a fairly simple existence of subsistence farming, raising families, and practicing their ancestral religion. Some of the aspects of that religion, though, that has gained a lot of attention. And this is coupled with the fact that Dogons seem to have an incredibly sophisticated understanding about the stars. They apparently have a long history of tracking and looking toward the stars ever since today non-human visitors descended among them. According to the Dogon, there's one star in particular that the extraterrestrial guests said they hail from, the Dog Star, otherwise known as Sirius. Dogon legend tells us that the ancient ancestors of the Dogon people were staring up at the stars one fine evening when a flaming arc suddenly came into view and began to descend from the heavens right in front of them. The arc descended from a larger glowing object, suspected to be the main UFO, or the mothership, if you will. It remained hovering high above the whole time. The smaller scout craft landed, and from it came strange fish-like entities. Legend has it these entities taught the Dogon basic aspects of civilization and generally how to make their lives better. Story striking for its clear description and details, but echoes of similar accounts can be found among the ancient Greeks and mythical tales from the Near East and even in Native American legends. The big difference between the Dogon account and these other narratives, though, is that Dogon keeps what seemed to be a pretty straightforward, detailed record of what seems like a real event, without any of the fanciful exaggerations, embellishments, and reinterpretations that have affected other mythical tales. Dogon basically just gives us the facts, at least as they understand them. They state they saw a huge unidentified flying object hovering above them, and a smaller UFO came down and landed. And from the smaller UFO, strange non-humans came out and got into a dialogue with them. They didn't say Zeus rode down on a thunderbolt, only for Hercules to challenge a wrestling match. In that Greek mythology, the Dogon account's free of any such fanciful nonsense and seems to provide a clear-cut and dried account of what can be described as an extraterrestrial encounter that occurred at some point in the distant past. Even Carl Sagan, who's normally skeptical, once considered the Dogon account to perhaps be a true remembrance of such an incredible event. What's even more incredible is that this tale has been preserved and passed on, though not through writing, but by way of oral storytelling. For anyone who ever tried to repeat a related account back to somebody else simply by word of mouth, it becomes clear just how much a narrative can change from one person to another. But the Dogon somehow stuck to the same script, and generation after generation repeated the exact same account, word for word, for thousands of years. First time the outside world even heard their story was sometime in the 1950s when anthropologists made their way to this remote region, which is now part of Mali, and spoke to members of the tribe firsthand. Well, the tribe had a surprise for these researchers, though, because along with their intriguing account of visitors from the stars, they presented them with a secret these visitors had bestowed on them. The visitors had apparently revealed to the Dogon that Sirius, from the star from which they came, had a companion star to them for humans to see from their vantage point of Earth. The primary star is Sirius A, and the other one Sirius B. Well, the Dogon referred to this as the dark star. Anthropologists weren't astronomers, but they took note of what the Dogon was telling them. Shockingly enough, astronomers confirmed as an astronomical fact that Sirius does indeed have a companion star, a dim white dwarf only detectable by way of powerful telescopes. Now, you might say this may be just some bizarre coincidence. It could be argued that Dogon just came up with the idea of Sirius having a dark star at random, just so happened to line up with scientific fact. But if this was just a coincidence, it wasn't the only one. Dogon also seemed to have an uncanny knowledge of many other astronomical features. They knew the moon was a dry and lifeless place. Now, that might seem like common sense to us today, but as recently as the 1950s, folks still thought the the moon's sea of tranquility was in fact full of water. We now know the moon actually does have some water ice at the poles, but that's nothing compared to previous theories about the moon having freshwater lakes and even forest of trees on its surface. All the way up in the 1950s, some argued this could be the case, but not the doggone. They knew the truth. They insisted the moon was mostly a dry and dead rock. They also understood the Earth's moon wasn't the only moon in the solar system. They could somehow explain in great detail all the moons that orbit the planet Jupiter. The question becomes, how did they know such things without even the aid of a basic telescope? That's actually a mind-boggling mystery. Unless, of course, one of those visitors from the stars told them. Did their interstellar guest reveal these great secrets to the Dogon before they left? Or the Dogon have cherished the mystery so much that they passed down precise and consistent oral recollections of all that transpired between them and the ET visitors to this very day. They refer to their visitors as the Nomo, and have dutifully preserved all that the Nomo taught them. Maybe there's still a few things that we can learn from the Nomo even today. Well, one of the most dramatic facets in modern religious discourse is the notion that God might suddenly snatch up millions of believers in the twinkling of an eye. The notion of the rapture has become ingrained in many mainline Christian denominations. But the curious thing about it wasn't really mentioned much until the 1860s. It was during this period that a lay preacher by the name of Darby developed his own unique interpretation of some of the Apostle Paul's words in the biblical book of Thessalonians. Now, the book of Thessalonians is actually a letter that Paul had written to the church at Thessalonica. And this was actually a real church with real people who had their own share of real problems that Paul was trying to address. That apparently had been openly wondered what would happen to those who were still alive when Christ returned. Since much of the Christian world had been so utterly transformed by Darby's take on the rapture, there's a lot that needs to be explained, frankly. Prior to any mention of a rapture taking place, the main belief in Christianity had always been the second coming of Christ and a resurrection of the dead. Now, Christ was crucified, physically resurrected from the dead, and ascended to heaven in whole bodily form. And he was believed to return in like manner. The question was burning in the minds of the Thessalonians is what would happen to those who were still alive on earth when Christ came back. Sure, they knew that the trumpet would sound, dead would be resurrected and rise up out of their graves, but what about the folks that weren't dead yet? What would happen to them when Christ came back? That's what the Thessalonians wanted to know. Well, that's for this reason Paul famously wrote, "We don't want you to be uninformed, brothers, about those who are asleep, and you may not grieve as others do, have no hope. Since you believe that Jesus died and rose again, even so through Jesus God will bring with him those who have fallen asleep. And for this we declare to you by a word from the Lord that we who are alive and who are left until the coming of the Lord will not precede these who have fallen asleep. For the Lord himself will descend from heaven with a cry of command, and with the voice of an archangel, with the sound of the trumpet of God. And the dead in Christ will rise first. Then we who are alive, who are left, will be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, and will always be with the Lord." For nearly 2,000 years, this verse was skimmed over as not being much more consequential than any other verse. It wasn't until Darby latched onto that one verse in this passage he managed to kickstart an entirely different religious conception. Since then, there have been multiple efforts to predict when the rapture might take place. Famously, a couple of these predictions made by the late supposed prophet Harold Camping, both of them alleged to have occurred in the year 2011. But if they happened, the rest of us must have been really got left behind because we didn't even notice. Another date for the rapture was set for September 23rd, 2017, in what was referred to as the Revelation 12 sign story. Didn't happen on that date either. Rapture apologists are often quick to point out that Jesus informed his disciples that even he didn't know the hour of their second coming. Only the Father in heaven knew for sure. And it's important to note that in their chaotic confabulation, these same rapture apologists seem to forget that Jesus was indeed referring to his second coming and not actually speaking about the rapture as it's come to be understood today. With all this talk of rapture, another intriguing conspiracy theory is developed called Project Bluebeam. And this conspiracy theory is based on the notion that one day a rapture will indeed happen, but it's going to be a fake one. This oddball theory contends that some secret government or secret society somewhere developed a means to project a John hologram into the skies. that suggested this technology would be used to project an image of Christ up in the air for the world to see in a fake second coming of Christ. Now, as wacky as this sounds, it's been proposed as a potential contingency operation for the powers that be in case the rapture really does occur. Whatever you might think about the notion of the rapture, but as far as conspiracy theories go, it doesn't get much stranger than Project Bluebeam. And there have been some strange projects bandied about. Well, let's talk about a wise and mysterious stranger who appeared in pre-Columbian America. I'm talking about Quetzalcoatl. In many parts of pre-Columbian America, in the lands of North and South America, prior to the arrival of Columbus and Europeans, Native American legends talk about a mysterious stranger. In multiple tales, there's a figure who's been given multiple names, but the main thrust of the narrative remains the same. It was a tall, pale-faced man with a beard, dressed in a simple cloak, wearing sandals. Showed up one day and started working miracles. According to this legend, he was able to heal the sick and even raise the dead. He preached to the masses and encouraged them to love and respect one another. He was a clear advocate for peace, but wouldn't be trifled with. The accounts also speak about how when different villages proved to be hostile to his teachings, he was ready to call down fire from heaven to destroy those villages. The Mayans call this figure Kukulkan. Others refer to him as Viracocha. Aztecs called him Quetzalcoatl. Whatever he was called, though, it was agreed that this figure was benign, and despite being provoked to wrath by hostile villagers on occasion, he simply tried to improve the lives of those he encountered. Native American civilizations such as the Mayans and the Aztecs attributed much of their great learning in math and astronomy to this mysterious figure. According to legend, many people ultimately chose to reject his advice and instead adopted his ways of peace and harmony. Instead, they turned toward their old habits of warfare and ritualized human sacrifice. When he realized he could no longer be of service, they stepped onto a raft of writhing serpents and prepared to travel to the other side of the sea. It said this mysterious stranger wept when he departed, but promised those who still believed in his teachings he'd return one day. And it was due to this promise of a return that Aztec ruler Montezuma was so startled when the Spaniards arrived. According to legend, the mysterious figure at the center of these accounts was a pale-faced, basically European-looking man who had arrived from across the sea. There was a lot of concern that maybe Hernan Cortez, who entered into the dialogue with the Aztecs, was either Quetzalcoatl or at the very least one of his representatives. But Hernan Cortez and his fellow Spaniards were not men of peace. Oh no, they were conquerors. Interestingly enough, they did share Quetzalcoatl's apparent disgust with the practice of ritualized human sacrifices. Aztecs were infamous for placing victims on top of their massive step pyramids, ripping out their still beating hearts, and tossing the body down the steps as blood flowed down the sides of the pyramid like a river. Needless to say, Cortez and his fellow conquistadors are horrified and use this practice as justification for conquering the Aztecs and forcing them to become Christians. Yes, it seemed that Quetzalcoatl had given the people a choice to follow him, and when they refused, he wept and departed. But Cortez and his folks weren't so easily dissuaded. Instead, they forced the Aztecs to convert to their way of thinking by way of the sword. There are, of course, many who have sat back and long wondered who the mysterious figure of pre-Columbian America was. It's obviously looked at least somewhat European in countenance, since the Aztecs were so bewildered by Cortez and the Spaniards looking similar to the figure of their legends. Considering as much, some have wondered if perhaps a European monk had long ago managed to make his way to America and openly preach the gospel, trying to convert the masses. If that's the case, it's incredible a monk could make such a journey all on their own lonesome, let alone survive in a land that would have been so largely hostile to outsiders. But according to legend, this was no ordinary person. Somebody who could heal and even raise the dead. Somebody who could call down fire from heaven if necessary. Some have speculated that perhaps this figure was some great biblical prophet, maybe even Jesus Christ himself. Yet there are those who have pointed out that since this visitation is believed to have occurred several centuries prior to the arrival of Columbus to the Americas, maybe it was none other than the resurrected Jesus Christ who paid a visit to the Native Americans. Now, if you were a Bible-believing Christian, such things wouldn't be at all out of the realm of possibility. In Scripture, Jesus was crucified, physically resurrected, and ascended to the skies in bodily form. Many today forget that Christianity teaches Jesus is currently in the flesh in a physically resurrected form. And although they celebrate Easter every year and his promise of resurrection, a lot of Christians are convincing themselves that Jesus is actually some kind of spirit. But that's not what the Bible teaches. Scripture clearly states he was physically resurrected and still lives in a physical, although immortal form. Well, having said that, who's to say that the resurrected Jesus couldn't have floated up into the air in front of his disciples on the day of Ascension before making a brief detour to the west and come down in the Americas to preach to the native peoples he found there? That's actually the gospel truth, according to the Mormons, who teach something very similar. But actually, it's anybody's guess. Interesting legends of Quetzalcoatl, strange coincidences and similarities between recorded history and misconceived notions, ancient legends, and biblical scriptures still remain. They have not yet been worked out. Well, there is, of course, a lot of conspiracy theories. One that I find absolutely fascinating is the idea there's a secret Nazi base in Antarctica. It's known as Base 211. This is what happens when you mix UFOs and Nazis and Antarctica all together. There's a lot of conspiracy theories related to World War II in Antarctica. And the conspiracy theories certainly get bizarre. In fact, that as you delve deeper into them, it might almost seem like the Germans never lost the war. There's a certain brand of conspiracy theory that asserts that the Nazis relocated to a base in Antarctica from their icy fortress to operate a fleet of flying saucers. These craft were allegedly rushed off to a hidden Nazi base in Antarctica just as the Allies are closing in on Hitler's bunker in Berlin, Germany. And according to the story, Adolf Hitler was never officially confirmed as found. Now, there's a lot of theories about that as well, so some have even suggested that he or his dead body were taken to the Nazi base in Antarctica. At any rate, this wild conspiracy theory would have us believe that although the Germans technically lost the war, they established a breakaway society in Antarctica, which has not only survived but thrived. Now, that's, of course, as far-fetched to say the least, but even if we entertain such a wild theory, we'd have to look at some historic facts. According to the official historical narrative, the Germans first began exploring Antarctica in the late 19th century. These first forays culminated in a major push into Antarctica in 1938. Now, if you're a student of history, 1938 was just 1 year prior to the outbreak of World War II in 1939. Not all the world was at war with the Nazis at that point, but due to the German invasion of Poland in the fall of that year, Britain and France got dragged into it. Interestingly, just prior to the Germans' 1938 trek to Antarctica, an already well-known veteran of the Antarctic, Richard E. Byrd, paid Germany a visit and talked at length in front of the German Society of Polar Research. Strangely enough, shortly after World War II ended, it was Admiral Byrd who led a special military operation to the Antarctic. And that mystery is still shrouded in mystery. It was known as Operation High Jump. Well, the official narrative states it was just a military exercise, a training exercise to train troops in operating in polar temperatures. But it was exceedingly odd since it came so close on the heels of World War II. And involved what seemed to be a massive invasion force of Navy ships and planes and even submarines. Well, before we go further into Operation High Jump, let's talk about what the Germans actually did just prior to and during World War II as it pertains to Antarctica. Under the guidance of a certain Captain Reicher, they completed an expedition, even claimed part of the Antarctic as their own. They called it New Schwabenland. Did so with the express authorization of Nazi enforcer Hermann Goering. They'd only explored this part of Antarctica and also annexed it and claimed it as a territorial extension of Germany itself. Once World War II erupted, further exploration was put on hold, or at least that's what the official record says. However, according to some conspiracy theories, the Germans continued with the program even during World War II. It said, in fact, that a massive base was built under the ice where a complex network of tunnels was created specifically to allow one of Nazi Germany's special passions, the submarine, easily parked deep under the ice field. And if you think that's far-fetched, it gets even more far-fetched. Because according to the theory, top Nazis, possibly even Hitler himself, fled on those same submarines and made their way to this Antarctic base. And that's just the icing on the Nazi cake, because it gets spookier. It's proposed that Nazis have built a fleet of flying saucers and parked them in Antarctica as well. According to this theory, the flying saucers that began to be seen in large numbers right after World War II are actually Nazi machines that were leaving their Antarctic base to menace the victorious allies who had won World War II. It was roughly 1 year after the official end of World War II, in the summer of 1946, that a massive military expedition with Admiral Byrd in command made their way to Antarctica. Despite the huge scale of the operation, it was kept largely quiet at the time, and anybody asked questions about it, they were told it was a military drill. So the actual questions are basic. Do the Germans still have a secret base in Antarctica? Now, since only a handful of people visit Antarctica in any given year as it pertains to this mind-boggling mystery, there just aren't too many people who might know the truth. Well, there's another conspiracy theory that is making the rounds about chemtrails, and it's actually a polarizing conspiracy theory. Seems that folks either believe it's all a load of nonsense, or they readily subscribe to the theory there's a secret government program in the works to spray chemicals in the upper reaches of the atmosphere. Now, skeptics, of course, are quick to dismiss the whole thing. They insist what the witnesses are seeing is nothing more than a normal trail of condensation left behind from planes traveling through the atmosphere. Well, this benign phenomena has been commonly observed from aircraft of all kinds for decades. It's known as the leaving of contrails. For those who believe in a more sinister variation of chemtrails, they're quick to point out that the normal condensation created in the form of contrails very quickly evaporates and doesn't leave a long-lasting streak across the sky as the chemtrails do. They further point out that the contrails are a result of cold air on typically chilly days interacting with the warm parts of a plane's engine, creating vaporous condensation. But chemtrails occur whether it's cold outside or not. Could be downright balmy, and you'd still see a long, strange streak of supposed chemtrail vapor streaming over their heads. The problem with suggested chemtrails and contrails are one and the same is the fact that contrails don't typically form less than 30,000 feet up. But chemtrails are seen being spread at much lower altitudes than that. One of the most interesting means of dispelling the notion that they were the same is to witness both variations at the same time. Such an example has been noted by observers on the ground. When a contrail is seen next to a chemtrail, the difference is pretty obvious. The contrail quickly dissolves, and the supposed chemtrail stretches out, as one witness puts it, from horizon to horizon. Also seems to last for an extended period of time. Even the most casual observer can tell that there's something different about these two types of plane exhaust being spewed just above their heads. Though the interesting thing about these supposed chemtrails is that planes have already allegedly been seen suddenly halting the chemtrails in mid-flight. In other words, the plane is flying overhead, spewing out this long trail, and suddenly, like a flip of a switch, the trail stops. It's not possible with contrails, since the only way to stop a contrail is shut off the plane's engine. Unless the pilot wants to go into free fall and crash, I don't like that it shut off the plane's engine in mid-flight. Chemtrails, though, seem to be a controlled action of some sort, and not just a mere byproduct of condensation. There's some further anecdotal evidence given by those on the ground, which really hits close to home. Evidence consists of some sort of sticky whitish residue that's been reported coating cars and the windows of houses and even whole yards after chemtrails have been spotted above. Besides the disturbing sight, some have gone so far as to claim the substance made them sick. Been reports of shortness of breath and migraines and vertigo among those who've been exposed to it. And there are indeed powerful chemtrails, or chemicals rather, that could very well induce such symptoms in a biological specimen, such as a human, if we were to be unwittingly exposed. Fortunately, the effects seem to be short-term. But whether it's just residue, it's proven to be a chemical irritant of some sort at the very least. Nevertheless, if such things were true, and that's a big if, it would represent nothing short of a criminal act. Needless to say, you can't just go around spraying people's yards with chemical irritants. And there's still a lot of debate on this subject unless there's an acknowledgement or a means of convincingly debunking the conspiracy theory. Likely continue for much more debate on the topic in the years to come. Interestingly enough, though most would likely contend there's nothing real about the chemtrails, there's been at least some tacit acknowledgement of the phenomenon at the highest levels of government. Back in 2001, then Congressional Representative Dennis Kucinich accidentally on record on the subject. His tacit acknowledgement came in the midst of his effort to introduce legislation aimed at banning space-based as well as comet-based weapons such as chemtrails. Bill was later revised and the term chemtrails was dropped. Well, Even so, Kucinich, for one, didn't pull any punches when it came to the subject. During his failed presidential bid in 2004, he was asked about this topic on the campaign trail and stated for the record, chemtrails are real. So if we're entertaining the idea that they're real, what are they for? Why are they being deployed in our skies? There have actually been a few theories. One of the most prominent is it's a secret effort to combat climate change. And even though climate change alarmists would have us believe there's nothing we can do to halt climate Armageddon other than putting the brakes on oil drilling and raising gas prices through the roof, there's a theory that scientists have developed means of altering the chemistry of the atmosphere in order to stave off the worst effects of climate change. Also, the idea the military is in the process of developing weather-based weaponry. Many conspiracy theories often point to a white paper written by the Air Force back in 1996, which was titled Weather as a Force Multiplier, Owning the Weather in 2025. Research paper speaks about the need to gain advantage as it pertains to weather modification, lest a U.S. adversary beat America to the punch. So this might be what all these chemtrails are about, some sort of live-action test by the Air Force. And if that's so, and we're seeing a sudden culmination of many years of research in the field, you only wonder what 2025 and beyond is going to bring. On that note, we come to the end of today's show. We'll be back tomorrow. And once again, we'll be talking about stories that are strange and unusual. Until then, this is Ken Hudnall for the Ken Hudnall Show saying have a truly great evening.